Look, I get lots and lots of people who send me messages and ask about divorce. And the other day I was talking to God and I was like, God, man, you remember that one time when I posted up, what God has joined together, let no man separate? You know that verse in Matthew? Man, I look so stupid saying that now when I'm going through a divorce myself. Do you know what happened in that moment? I literally heard him laugh and go, yeah, what I joined together, Brittany, I didn't join that together. And I said, what? What? Hold on. What God has joined together, let no man separate. Hold on. That means that there are some marriages that you haven't joined together. Wait, what? And then went on my rabbit trail. So after, I don't know, a couple days of research, I'm going to bring you something that's going to help you in your life, in your marriage. If you're with an unbelieving spouse, if you are trying your hardest, maybe you didn't know in the beginning when you got married, like, oh, you didn't realize you were unequally yoked. Maybe you didn't realize that God has a covenant for people who are in covenant with him. That's the only way he can have covenant together, is if both people are in covenant with him. He said, do not be unequally yoked, meaning that, you know, a yoke has this, wooden beam that's tied onto two oxen, and if one's going this way and one's going this way, it's not going to work. He's not going to spiritually go, okay, you are equally yoked. No. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us? First of all, it gave me about a piece and a half, because let me tell you what, I went on a deep dive for you, and we're going to break the internet with this. So let's go. So covenant. Let's get a couple things straight. You can pipe in my comments, tell me how I'm wrong all you want. Here we go. Covenant, can we agree? In Amos 3:3, it says, can two walk together unless they are agreed? Every covenant, right? Every covenant, every marriage covenant may be recognized by law here on earth, on the land. That doesn't mean that it is spiritually in covenant with God. You have to both be walking with him in order for God to recognize that your marriage is a covenant. I know what people are going to say. We're going to get there. Don't worry. Marriage mirrors the covenant between Christ and the church. In Ephesians 5:22 and 25, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself to her. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. If your husband is not following God, he is not going to be able to mirror the image. Therefore, there is no covenant in God's eyes. He looks at it and goes, you did this on your own. Whew. Let's get to it. We getting there. Don't worry. The husband must love like Christ, sacrificially, selfishly, spiritually. The wife can submit in peace and trust because she feels secure in that love. That's the only kind of love to feel secure in. There is no other love to feel secure in. God honors the covenant he joins, not every human union. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not men separate, Matthew 19:6. The emphasis is what God has joined, not merely what man has united and said, okay, we're going to make this work. God recognizes marriage. It's real and binding on earth, yes, but it does not necessarily bless or have covenant over them both unless they are walking in alignment with him. It's like a spiritual contract that's missing one signature, right? When you sign a contract, you have to agree to everything in the terms and conditions. Well, God looks down and says, hey, my contract is to bless your union for you to be in covenant with me, that you both are following me. When there's not a signature there, he can't bless it. Okay, so I was like, how else do I see this in the Bible? How else? Well, that goes into free will. Free will goes into salvation. Wait, covenant kind of mirrors salvation. It's kind of parallel there. How does that go? Just like salvation requires faith and surrender, the covenant requires believing hearts in both parties. If one rejects God, they reject his covenant structure. God only blesses a marriage covenant when both parties are in covenant with him. So I know where we're going to go. We're going to go into, well, you know, you can sanctify your spouse through the unbelieving spouse. Yes, I still 100% believe that. Duh. Yes, right? Like, God wants to give everybody the opportunity and the chance. So yeah, God's grace can touch the unbelieving partner through the believer, but that doesn't make it a full covenant of unity. It means God's working through one spouse and he invites the other spouse to go, hey, you see this spouse over here working hard? You see what she's doing? This is a light. This isn't normal. You see this is different. Ask her what's different. I have physically watched an unbelieving spouse come to God because of his wife's covenant with God. So I'm not saying that it can't happen. What I'm saying is, if your spouse is going absolutely bananas the wrong direction and you're wondering what's going on and you realize that you never had a covenantal relationship to begin with, hold please. The unbelieving spouse can live under that influence, right? but they don't have a relationship with God. We can cover them. We can intercede for them. Think about praying and how God says we can intercede with others. We can lock arms with others and intercede and go before the throne. But that doesn't mean that that person's saved. We're just praying with that person, right? We can intercede just like a believing spouse can intercede for an unbelieving spouse. So covenant requires agreement, Amos 3:3. Without shared faith, unity is impossible. Marriage models Christ and the church, Ephesians 5:22-25. Husbands must love like Christ, wives must submit. God joins what's aligned in his will, Matthew 19:6. He blesses what reflects his design. Salvation requires belief, Romans 10:9. Covenant does too. Both must believe and walk in a blessing. Believing spouses sanctify the home, 1 Corinthians 7:14. Grace may reach the unbeliever, but not in full covenant. God honors the covenant when both are in covenant with him. Without this alignment, your marriage may exist. Let me throw this brain buster out there for you. When a believer divorces an unbeliever who has rejected God and refuses to live in peace, the believer isn't breaking a covenant before God because that person has already broken fellowship with him. That's 1 Corinthians 7:15. But if an unbeliever departs, let him depart. A brother or sister is not in bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. This means God releases the believing spouse from spiritual bondage when the unbeliever rejects the covenant through rebellion or abandonment, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually. But it is not spiritually joined by God. God does not want his people to suffer. God gives an out to those moments. God calls us to live in peace, and he calls us to live in a place that produces peace, and we can remove ourselves from the unbelieving spouse. That's what he says. Have you ever heard it put that way? I never had. I was shocked. But I'm telling you, if you're in a relationship that was never a covenant to begin with, what are you doing? The devil's just coming in and putting you off track from everything you're supposed to be doing with God. I'm not saying leave, but I am saying talk to God about it. Have a good day, guys.